I knew something was wrong the moment the new intern, some kid straight out of a state college with a lanyard still creaking from the packaging, called me Amber for the third time that week, and not a single person corrected him. My name is Avery. 6 years in that office, and I was still getting confused with whatever woman happened to stand closest to the shared fridge. But that's how it works in corporate America when you don't make noise. When you quietly fix broken workflows while the shiny people wave their hands around in meetings and collect LinkedIn praise for driving transformation. Like the time our compliance templates were about to lapse because a genius on the infrastructure team decided to delete 6 months of audit logs to free up server space. While Brandon Mercer, the new hire with teeth too white to be medically plausible, was presenting animated slides about cultural acceleration, I was in the cold server room with a USB stick in my mouth, digging Solaritech out of what would have been a $3 million federal fine. I didn't get applause. I got back pain and a neon sticky note on my monitor written in bubbly pink gel pen. We should all learn to delegate more. That's the thing about being good at your job in a world built for peacocks. They'll watch you pull the wagon until your spine folds in half, then ask if maybe you weren't adaptable enough for innovation. If you've ever sat at your desk, holding together the only system keeping an entire department from collapsing, while a director talks over you about synergy, you get it. And if you do, hit the subscribe button and toss a like. Not for me. For the crew behind this mic, who keeps these stories from sounding like the diary of a corporate burnout. You'd be shocked how far one tiny thumbs up goes when you're trying to turn office betrayal into something bingeable instead of something that makes you flip a table. Anyway, Brandon arrived with a title so long it practically required an index. Director of Operational Revitalization and Strategic Culture Architecture. Translation? Somebody's MBA friend parachuted into the middle of the org chart to gut teams and call it transformation. He strutted around the Seattle headquarters like a tech conference messiah, dropping buzzwords like grenades, agile dependencies, compliance fluidity, culture elasticity, adaptive synergies. I used to keep a bingo card in my drawer, full blackout by Wednesday. Yet he got traction. He was loud, photogenic in a way that made you suspicious, and smiled like every question asked was personally offensive. People like him don't climb ladders. They're thrown to the top by whoever built the ladder. First thing he did was host a listening town hall where he didn't listen. Then he pushed the executive team to reevaluate legacy roles, which of course meant chopping departments that didn't drink with him after work. My role was at the top of the list. Quiet, senior, resistant to agile onboarding. But I wasn't just filing reports. I built our compliance ecosystem from scratch, coded automated audits, tied approval chains to vendor contracts, and yes, slipped my name, very deliberately and very legally, into the footnotes of the systems he was trying to bulldoze. I had seen the writing on the wall 2 quarters earlier and began setting landmines. One of them was something I called the continuity clause. It was simple. If the designated key person left, certification froze until they re-verified. Guess whose name was on the key person line? Not because I planned revenge, but because I knew one day someone like Brandon would arrive with perfect teeth, perfect confidence, and zero understanding of why compliance exists. And when that day came, I wanted my exit to speak louder than my presence ever could. I just didn't think it would come so soon. Brandon moved fast. Recklessly fast. Within 3 weeks, he'd shoved half our workflows into a tool we didn't even have licenses for yet. He iced me out of meetings, claimed I struggled with velocity, said I was institutional knowledge with no forward momentum, whatever that means. I kept showing up anyway, still fixing things, still pulling the wagon, but my gut knew. You can smell your firing coming. And mine? It was already in the air. You can always feel the shift before they push you out. It's in the way people suddenly stop asking you the questions they know only you can answer. It's in the way IT accidentally disables your VPN credentials for 2 hours and no one bothers to apologize. It's in the way your desk feels colder. Like even the air vents know your expiration date is coming up. The morning it finally happened, I had just finished revalidating the last set of vendor precursor forms. 48 of them. Manual checks, cross-references, timestamps, all tied to our automated audit ledger. The sort of work no one noticed unless it failed. 6 years invisible unless something broke. Brandon called me into conference room 6B. He sat there with a company-issued tablet propped in front of him. Lips formed into the kind of smile you'd expect from someone rehearsing for a toothpaste commercial. HR was on Zoom, camera off, mic muted. That's how you know it's a firing and not a meeting. We're restructuring, Brandon said, flipping to a slide like he was presenting quarterly growth projections. Your role has become redundant in the new framework. I asked if he wanted that in an email. He laughed, a short nasal honk, like a goose getting kicked. No severance, no handoff plan, no successor who understood even a tenth of what I built. Just a pat on the back, a mugging grin, and a, "Don't worry, we've got it covered." Afterward came the meeting that nearly made me throw a chair across the room. It was supposed to be a routine compliance review, 20 minutes tops. Instead, Brandon turned it into a stage performance, complete with 3 screens, one for his slides, one for live metrics, and one displaying his own name in bold Helvetica like a low-budget award show. We were reviewing the Q3 certification logs, the same ones I'd closed out 2 weeks early, but Brandon wasn't interested in results. He wanted a narrative. His narrative. One where my carefully engineered systems were presented as flaws, so that removing me looked like visionary leadership. "See this redundancy loop?" he said, pointing at a chart he didn't understand. "Why do we have 3 verification steps for a single vendor approval?" I said, "Because one is internal, one is third-party, and one satisfies federal cross-checks. Cut one, and we risk non-conformance." His eyes lit up like I'd walked into his trap. "That's exactly my point. We've built a bureaucracy that feeds itself." He plastered on a pitying smile. "Avery, you've done great work, but we don't need a cathedral blessing every box of bolts coming into the warehouse." A marketing intern snorted. Brandon didn't. "I think you're too attached to old systems," he said. "It's admirable, but not scalable. We're moving toward agile compliance." "Agile compliance?" I repeated. "That sounds like calling a parachute optional halfway through a skydive." He waved me off. "This isn't personal, but your documentation style is dense legacy. We need operators who lean forward. Do you want me to confirm you said that? In writing?" I asked. He scoffed again. "Do you want that in an email?" And just like that, I knew it was already done. My laptop was still warm in my bag when he slid a thin HR packet across the table. Termination effective immediately. The HR rep unmuted long enough to say, "We'll mail you your final check," then vanished like a digital magician's rabbit. I didn't argue. Didn't list the 7 vendor chains requiring my login for validation. Didn't mention the registration flags I manually audited because the automation was still held together with duct tape and hope. I just looked at the signature line on the termination document. His name. Not mine. That detail would matter later. It always does. I took one last look around the conference room. The glass panels, the smudged whiteboard cluttered with half-erased notes he would never understand, the blinking server status light no one but me ever noticed. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a hollow vacuum in my ribs, like someone had opened an airlock. I walked out without a word. No dramatic exit speech, no tears, just the sound of my boots hitting linoleum and the hum of systems I built. Still running, still loyal, no longer tethered to me. Back at my desk, as I packed what little I kept there, an automated notification arrived. Reminder: key person verification required for contract package SCT 244. I didn't laugh, but I did smile, quietly, because the first domino had fallen. They didn't even notice I was gone. No farewell email, no HR exit interview. Not even one of those cheap good luck cards someone signs out of guilt. Just a half-filled banker box, a dying office plant, and a manager who thought deleting my Solaritech Outlook account was the same as replacing me. Brandon strutted around the office like he'd decapitated a dragon, bragging about de-siloing compliance bottlenecks and announcing that all workflows would now be self-sustaining, as if spreadsheets had suddenly grown consciousness and could perform federal audits by themselves. 3 days later, the first cracks appeared. Small, almost invisible, unless you knew the system like I did. A vendor approval hung in processing. An automated document sync froze. The warehouse flagged an inbound delivery that should have been auto-rejected because the vendor's ISO cert had expired months prior. But the alert protocol, my alert protocol, hadn't triggered because Brandon had disabled the step he thought was redundant. He blamed admin error, said someone probably fat-fingered a drop-down, called it growing pains. Then 3 more approvals failed. Procurement flagged it to him in the weekly sync. Brandon brushed it off like lint. "We're phasing out Avery's over-engineered structures. It's just friction." He kept saying Avery's stuff like the entire compliance infrastructure was a pile of outdated recipe cards he'd found stuffed in a drawer. But the thing about invisible systems is they stay invisible only when they work. Once they don't, they become the only thing anyone can see. Meanwhile, I was out. Fully out. Phone off. Slack deleted. No more 11 p.m. patch fixes. No more babysitting audits like toddlers with scissors. I sat in a booth at a 24-hour diner off Pike Street, drinking burnt coffee and watching raindrops skid sideways across the window, wondering if anyone at Solaritech had even tried to log into the compliance dashboard. That was when it happened. Not a message, not a call, an alert. Encrypted legal notice from the document automation system I helped build 2 years earlier. It was designed to track risk flags and trigger escalations anytime a key person dependency wasn't met. The notification blinked. Contract package SOL XR311, flagged for validation interrupt. Section 7C clause in effect. Verification required from designated signatory. Collins, AS. I blinked. Read it again. Then again. Attached was the contract. Not just any contract, the one Brandon had been parading around as his masterpiece. A $200 million acquisition from a European tech conglomerate so obsessed with compliance, they made the FDA look like a lemonade stand. And they had triggered my clause. The one I'd embedded quietly into the vendor qualification pipeline, disguised as a continuity requirement. I hadn't written it for revenge. I'd written it because I knew someone like Brandon, loud, careless, allergic to detail, would eventually try to bulldoze the system. Section 7C was elegant. If the key compliance architect was no longer in service at the time of certification, all sign-offs required direct revalidation by that same individual. No substitutes, no overrides, no executive exceptions. Per contract, the buyer had to verify continuity before releasing funds. Translation: no Avery, no deal. Cold clarity washed through me. Not victory, just inevitability. They'd built a multi-million-dollar machine on top of my name, and the machine had finally hit the tripwire. By the end of week 1, the cracks at Solaritech widened into fissures. I heard from my former teammate, Lila, that 3 certification chains had been suspended pending review. An external audit from the buyer's legal team found a dozen inconsistencies. In corporate speak, that means prepare to get annihilated by a lawyer who earns more in a week than you do in 3 months. But Brandon was busy running Zoom firesides with the board, insisting everything was on track, leaner, smoother, more agile. He was carving holes in the hull and calling it ventilation. Then came the email thread. A message from an analyst at the buyer's firm, Lee Chen, who apparently reads every line of a contract instead of just searching for her bonus terms. She flagged Section 7C, attached a PDF, highlighted my name, and asked why I wasn't present for certification. This should have stopped the deal instantly. Instead, Brandon responded himself, because of course he did, and wrote, "Avery Collins is no longer with Solaritech. As current Director of Operations, I will be signing in her place." That single sentence detonated across both companies like a grenade with a legal degree. Back inside Solaritech's glass walls, panic began leaking through the cracks Brandon pretended didn't exist. Whispers spread through procurement, engineering, legal. None of them loud enough to reach the boardroom yet, but the kind of whispers that smell like smoke before anyone admits there's a fire. Meanwhile, I didn't lift a finger. I wasn't refreshing dashboards or waiting for updates. I wasn't stalking LinkedIn for drama crumbs. I had contacts. Real ones. People who weren't loyal to Brandon's TED Talk personality cult. I got pings. A forwarded Slack message from Lila. "Anyone know what Avery used to call the certification validator? Ours is stuck." An email screenshot. Brandon told the buyer's lawyer he's the new Avery. Glenn didn't laugh. A text from Ravi. "Yo, did you know your name is hard-coded into the cert chain? Because it is, and everything is failing." I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness, out of intention. Silence is not absence. Used correctly, silence is pressure. And the pressure was rising on Brandon so hard you could practically hear the screws popping. Every time Solaritech tried to override the clause, patch it, bypass it, or assign a proxy, the system kicked it back. Because I hadn't just written the clause, I'd written the architecture itself. And there, in the code where no one ever bothered to look, it said, "Designated signatory, Collins, AS. No override permitted without biometric reauthentication." And there was absolutely no way to fake my biometric signature. I don't care how many executives were in the room. I don't care how expensive their lawyers were. Without me, the machine was dead. The buyer's team scheduled the final signing meeting at Solaritech headquarters, a ceremony Brandon had been bragging about for months. The conference room was dressed like a wedding, fresh flowers, polished glass, branded water bottles, the works. Every VP wore their big deal face, all controlled smiles and nervous watch tapping. Brandon sat at the head of the table like he owned gravity. Navy blazer so tight it looked shrink-wrapped, sleeves rolled like he planned to disrupt something on command. Across from him sat the buyers. 6 people in dark suits, led by Glenn Traz, their lead attorney. Glenn didn't do small talk or smiles. He radiated the energy of a man who could shut down an entire merger with a raised eyebrow. The meeting began smoothly. Polite recaps, ceremonial praise, small talk about market conditions. Then, Glenn tapped his pen. Slow, deliberate, like a chess player touching his rook. "Before signatures," he said, flipping to a tab in the contract binder, "I have a point of clarification." The room tensed like someone had dropped the temperature by 10 degrees without moving. "Section 7C," he continued calmly, "requires validation and signature by the designated key person listed in the originating configuration index." He flipped a page with surgical precision. The individual listed is Avery S. Collins. The silence hit like a dropped boulder. Brandon forced a smile so tight it looked painful. "I'll be signing those forms." Avery was part of a prior structure. The clause is ceremonial. Glenn didn't blink. "We do not consider $200 million transaction ceremonial, Mr. Mercer." Someone coughed. Someone else put their water glass down with a soft clink. Glenn laid the page flat. "Miss Collins' signature is not optional. It is a legal trigger clause. Non-compliance suspends certification and liability transfer. No signature, no deal." Brandon tried to laugh. It came out hollow, like a balloon losing air. "Our systems have been updated. I oversee the latest integration." Glenn asked, Were you involved in the original architecture? Well, no, but do you possess credentials to validate certification continuity? The system's been updated. We've streamlined. Glenn didn't let him finish. The buyer's due diligence team attempted to authenticate. The system rejected all attempts not validated by Miss Collins' biometric hash. Brandon froze. Literally froze. The VPs behind him began shifting in their seats, subtle, embarrassed, like they didn't want to be associated with the incoming explosion. Someone whispered, "Jesus." Glenn closed the binder. "This deal does not move without her. I suggest you find her." Across the city, I sat in a quiet booth, stirring my coffee as my phone buzzed with missed calls. Unfamiliar numbers, blocked numbers, probably Brandon burning through prepaid phones like a teenager hiding from curfew. I ignored all of them. Instead, I opened the system dashboard. Section 7C. Triggered. Status? Blocked. No proxy signatures permitted. I leaned back and watched the storm I had designed finally break open. Brandon cracked in slow motion, the way a glass looks perfectly solid until you pour something into it and watch a thin line of liquid trace a fracture you never knew existed. At first came denial, loud, frantic denial wrapped in buzzwords and panic sweat. He paced the boardroom like a rejected TEDx speaker, repeating nonsense like, "We're solutioning this internally," and "There's compliance elasticity we're overlooking." Glenn Traz didn't flinch. The man had the emotional range of reinforced concrete. Brandon tried a different angle. Blame. "She was a junior manager," he snapped, slapping a palm flat on the table like authority could be summoned from force alone. Easily replaced. She had no executive decision power. Glenn, still completely unbothered, opened a fresh document with the calm detachment of someone reviewing a lunch order. "This," he said, sliding it across the table, "is a notarized copy of the original system configuration file, dated 3 months ago, signed by Avery S. Collins, designated key person under Clause 7C, countersigned by your former COO." The boardroom went dead silent. Brandon didn't touch the paper. His eyes flicked wildly from signature to signature, like he was searching for an escape hatch in the ink. That was the moment the shift happened. Not in him, but in the room. The VPs who had once clapped at his buzzwords began subtly pulling their chairs away from him, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive failure pooling at his feet. Someone cleared their throat and muttered, "We need to pause and regroup." Another voice, "Did we know about this clause?" A third, "Why didn't he flag this?" The word pause metastasized into delay and then emergency, and by the time it reached the executive Slack, it had turned into catastrophic risk exposure. And just like that, the $200 million deal froze. Not because of market instability, not because of geopolitical tension, not because of regulatory issues. It froze because a man who thought volume was a substitute for competence failed to read a contract. I was at home when the internal memo leaked to the press. Standing barefoot on cold kitchen tile, still in an oversized hoodie with a curry stain from the night before. The live stream of the press conference played on my laptop. The Solara Tech spokesperson tried to smile through clenched teeth as reporters hammered him with questions about procedural inconsistencies. His left eyelid twitched every time someone said the word delay. I knew that twitch well. I saw it every time Brandon talked. My phone buzzed. A text from Lila. "They're in full meltdown. Brandon's blaming you for hiding the clause." "Girl, he literally signed the damn renewal." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the system panel again. The dashboard flashed the same red banner. "Certification blocked. Override impossible." For the first time since walking out of Solara Tech's headquarters, I felt a quiet warmth in my chest. Something small, something steady. Not smugness, not revenge, just recognition. They had erased me from every Slack channel, directory, and org chart, but not the one place that mattered. not the part tied to the foundation. And now that foundation was shaking. By Monday morning, pause had evolved into something monstrous. Investors demanded explanations. The buyer's legal team shifted from stern to surgical. And inside Solaritech, the whispered panic had turned into open dread. Without certification, there was no liability transfer. Without liability transfer, there was no payout. Without payout, the entire post-acquisition expansion plan disintegrated like wet cardboard. Solaritech's first attempt to fix it came through the back door. Legal drafted a memo proposing equivalent authority reassignment. Glenn responded in 6 words. That dog won't hunt. Try again. The second attempt came from internal counsel, an effort to retroactively authorize system certification. The system rejected it, twice. Because the back-end section containing the certification triggers lived behind a legacy access partition only accessible through my credentials. Credentials Brandon had proudly deleted. Their third attempt, from what Ravi told me, involved calling the software vendor who built the underlying infrastructure. The vendor told them the same thing. Without Collins, the chain breaks. And now Brandon, the man who fired me with a goose honk laugh, was standing on the wrong side of a digital drawbridge with a $200 million sword swinging above his head. The key was in my hand, and I wasn't in a rush. The first olive branch came from the person least responsible for any of this. Lila. Sweet, overworked Lila, who once brought me cough drops during a winter flu outbreak, and who definitely didn't deserve to be used as Brandon's messenger pigeon. Hey, I know this is awkward, her text read, but they really need you to sign. Everything's stuck. 10 minutes later came Ravi. Can we talk? Not even about certs. Just, I think they finally get what you did. I didn't reply to either. Not because I was angry, but because this wasn't about them. This was about the principle. This was about value, acknowledgement, leverage. Things Solaritech never gave me, while I kept them out of multi-million-dollar compliance disasters. Then the corporate email started. The first subject line, urgent request for certification assistance. The message was cold, bureaucratic, and so drenched in legal varnish, it might as well have been written by a fax machine. Avery, Solaritech Systems requests your cooperation in finalizing the pending certification process. Please advise how we can proceed. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed one sentence. I no longer provide services to Solaritech Systems. Please refer to Section 7C. I attached the clause as a PDF, sent it, closed the tab. No flourish, no ellipses, no revenge-poisoned icing on top. Just the truth, clean and sharp. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I declined. It rang again. Declined. A third time. Declined. I could practically see Brandon pacing in the executive hallway, cycling through burner phones like a mafia intern. An hour later, another text. This one from a Scottsdale area code. The retired COO, Daniel Myers, the man who originally countersigned the clause. Avery, I'm being told I approved something that is now preventing a major transaction. Please call. I didn't, because none of these people, including Daniel, had what I needed to hear. This wasn't about fixing a mistake. This was about the fact that they had spent years treating me like a background process while building an entire empire on the systems I created. They had erased me, so now the system erased them back. By Thursday, Solaritech's leadership went from light delay to active crisis to 5-alarm legal inferno. The board called an emergency offsite at a downtown hotel. The entire executive suite attended, except one, Brandon. They didn't invite him. They summoned him. Ravi texted me a picture. Brandon, sitting stiffly in the lobby waiting area, hands clasped together, sweating through his shirt, like someone awaiting sentencing. For once, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the way he laughed when he fired me. The way he dismissed my warnings. The way he said ceremony like compliance was a birthday balloon. The board ordered legal to find a solution by any means necessary. They didn't realize there were none. Because I hadn't built a workaround. I had built a wall. Solaritech's final attempt came late Friday night, via an email so formal it sounded scared. Avery, Solaritech Systems would like to extend a formal offer for short-term contractor engagement, compensation and scope negotiable. Please advise the conditions under which you would consider resuming certification responsibilities. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I took a walk, bought a cinnamon roll roughly the size of a small car tire, sat on a park bench watching pigeons bully a crow out of a sandwich crust. I breathed. Then I went home, opened a blank document, and typed 3 bullet points. 1. Brandon Mercer is to be immediately and permanently removed from any role involving system oversight or personnel management. 2. All unpaid PTO, severance, and bonus compensation owed to me will be paid out in full and tripled. 3. All compliance architecture authored by me is no longer property of Solaritech Systems. It is licensed exclusively through Collins Compliance Group, LLC. All future certifications will occur under that entity. Any unauthorized use of my systems triggers breach proceedings. I read the bullets twice, didn't change a single word. Attached the document to an email titled Conditions for Cooperation. Sent it, then shut my laptop like ending a chapter. 12 hours later, the buyer's legal team contacted me directly. Not to pressure me, not to negotiate, but to confirm terms. Glenn himself called. His tone was low, precise, and somehow respectful. He asked if I understood the weight of what I was doing. I told him, "You're the one who insisted on accountability. You found it." A long pause, then, "Understood, Miss Collins." And with that, the entire trajectory of the deal shifted. The board realized the buyer was willing to proceed, but only on my terms. And suddenly, every executive who had ignored me for 6 years learned a new skill: humility. By the next morning, the deal had been rewritten. Not the terms of the acquisition itself, that all stayed intact, but the certification pathway. The buyer's legal team drafted a new agreement naming my newly formed entity, Collins Compliance Group, LLC, as the exclusive compliance authority for all certification and continuity validation tied to the $200 million transaction. My company, which was literally 5 days old, became the only approved gatekeeper. Solaritech had no choice but to accept. Their internal counsel protested, claimed it set a dangerous precedent, said it gave too much power to a single external contractor. Glenn shut them down with 4 words. You agreed to the clause, and that was that. The founder of Solaritech, Leonard Farrow, a man who once forgot my name while asking me to fix a licensing crisis, sent me an email so furious it might as well have been written in flames. No greeting, no sign-off, just, "This is extortion." I replied with a screenshot of his signature on the original Section 7C form. Nothing else. 2 minutes later, I got a follow-up. Understood. Proceed. Funny how signatures tend to quiet people. Meanwhile, the internal chaos at Solaritech reached biblical proportions. Brandon's meltdown spread through the company like a gas leak. Silent at first, then explosive. He tried to spin things internally, ranting that I had maliciously embedded a trap clause, even though the clause had been reviewed, approved, countersigned, and renewed every quarter. He tried blaming engineering, then legal, then procurement, then the intern who couldn't even spell compliance. Nothing stuck, because the truth was tattooed across every line of the contract. He didn't read a single word. By Friday afternoon, the board had no patience left. 2 plainclothes security staff escorted him from the building. Ravi captured the photo from behind a glass partition and sent it to me. Brandon, half-zipped duffel bag hanging from his shoulder, sunglasses on indoors, mouth frozen mid-protest as they walked him out a side door like contraband. For a moment, I stared at the image longer than I expected. Not with pity, not with triumph, just clarity. He had laughed when he fired me. He had dismissed my work. He had dismissed me. He thought compliance was paperwork. He thought I was replaceable. He thought the system didn't need its architect. But the thing about foundations is this: you don't notice them until you try to move the building without one. The next morning, the final contract packet arrived via secure e-sign. I reviewed it carefully. My LLC named, my authority uncontested, my compensation listed at 6 times my old annual salary for a single certification cycle. And one final line at the bottom, added by Glenn himself. Clause 7C. Obligations fulfilled. It was almost poetic. They attempted to erase me. Now they were paying me more than any director on their payroll just to legitimize the deal they couldn't survive without. The signing meeting was scheduled for Monday at 10 o'clock a.m. They didn't expect me to show. They thought I'd sign electronically and disappear again. But no. Sometimes you need to walk back into the room, not for applause, not for revenge, but for closure. When I arrived, security was already briefed. A boardroom chair had been dusted. Someone had placed a bottle of sparkling water beside my seat. The room filled with a nervous, unnatural calm. As soon as I stepped inside, small talk evaporated. Eyes shifted, throats cleared. Leonard looked at me like I was the IRS incarnate. Glenn was already seated, legal pad open, fountain pen placed neatly across the clean, single-page contract. Brandon was there too, not at the head of the table anymore. He sat off to the side like a child waiting to be scolded, coat folded stiffly across his lap. His eyes widened when he saw me, jaw tightening like he wanted to speak, but had swallowed every word he once used to patronize me. I didn't look at him. Not yet. Glenn gestured. Miss Collins? He said with a small nod. Respect, not relief. Your signature is the final gate. He slid the paper forward. There it was, one blank line. The line they had all spent 2 weeks trying and failing to bypass. I signed. Steady, clean. Full name, Avery S. Collins. Glenn closed the folder with a soft thud that sounded like the end of a storm. Thank you. I stood to leave, and then finally I looked at Brandon. His shoulders folded in on themselves. His hands clutched the handles of that pathetic duffel bag. His face was pale, stunned, hollow. Next time, I said quietly, yes, you put it in an email. He blinked, swallowed, but said nothing. I walked out without looking back. Not for Brandon, not for the board, not for the ghosts of 6 years cleaning up behind men who thought systems were optional and silence meant obedience. My work was done, and the building was still standing because I had built it that way.